Hello, spooky friends. Oftentimes we talk about the best ways to communicate with the other side. What is it exactly? Is it EVPs or something similar? There's one particular object that many find quite useful, but others find satanic and scary. Ouija boards. Fun with friends or something a little bit more sinister. So where did it all begin, and when did we start using Ouija boards? Where did they come from? Well, initially, Ouija boards were introduced because of seances. Now, seance is a French word meaning session, but it became an English word that made it useful to explain a group of people coming together to contact the other side, to do something spiritual, generally around a table. It was a way for people to gather to hear messages from the other side, or to power a medium to be the middle source between yourself and someone who had passed. It's sort of changed over time to less of a social thing and more of a you're gonna go to hell thing. It was a way for people to find answers that the living couldn't provide. This brought on the movement of spiritualism, which had been around Europe for many years, but when it approached America, particularly around 1848, it had a sudden prominence. Everybody and their uncle was sitting down on a Friday or a Saturday night with friends to do a seance. This was mostly because of two sisters, Kate and Margaret Fox. The Foxes claimed to receive messages from the other side. They told a neighbor that initially they had heard the ghost making rapping noises, and when they asked it to make a specific pattern of rapping noises, the ghost obliged. And it got more intelligent from there. They created this channeling process in parlors all across the state. They grew famous. Due to the sisters' influence, spiritualism reached a peak in America around the 19th century. Spiritualism worked for Americans. It worked really well with the dogma of Christianity, meaning one could hold a seance on a Saturday night and still go to church on a Sunday, and was even acceptable. It was considered even a wholesome activity, a great Saturday night with the girls, or the guys. It turned into automatic writing and table turning parties, in which participants would place their hands on a small table and it would begin to shake and rattle as if a spirit was there, all while declaring they weren't the ones that were moving it. The movement gave unexpected solace to people who had lost loved ones early. During this time, the average lifespan was only 50 years of age. Women died during childbirth, children dying early, and men dying during war and other fiascos. And during the Civil War, spiritualism burst through the scene. People came to spiritualism in droves, desperate to connect with those they had lost on the other side, those who had gone away to war and never returned. Famously, Mary Todd Lincoln, wife of Abraham Lincoln, conducted seances in the White House in order to contact their late 11-year-old son who died of fever in 1862. So with spiritualism being folded into everyday life and culture in America, the Ouija board was then introduced as a way to very easily communicate with the other side. Now, it has terrified many, I'm sure. It's been associated with Satanism and the devil, and I can explain why, and has even served as the plot in many Hollywood films.
Isn't that right, Daddy?
Even more famously, in 1951, it was featured on an episode of I Love Lucy, in which Lucy and Ethel host a seance via the Ouija board. But the Ouija board, in fact, came out of this obsession of contacting the other side and was actually a really large part of culture previous to Hollywood taking it and turning it into something a little bit more spooky. But the 19th century American fascination with spiritualism birthed the Ouija board as we see it today, with the belief that the dead are available for communication. All you need is just a board. Ouija boards have their roots in spiritualism, which grew in the 1840s in America. There are claims that Ouija boards are more ancient than that, but specifically this board with this name is birthed in the United States. This mysterious talking board, or the Ouija board that we see today, can all be attributed to some really great marketing. Spirit boards, also known as talking boards, are flat tables mostly made out of wood or sometimes cardboard, masonite, chipboard, you name it, a flat surface. And the board accompanies letters, symbols, and numbers, or even words. The board is usually accompanied by a planchette, the French word for little board, or you can use a shot glass. Everybody places 1 or 2 fingers on the board. It does stipulate in the instructions to use your finger and your thumb, though most people use their 2 fingers on the board, lightly placing it in the middle of the board. The appointed medium, or the person who is going to ask the questions, begins by saying, "Is there anybody here?" They name the spirit with whom they wish to communicate with. The rise of the talking board began in 1886 in America. The New York Tribune reported on this exciting new talking board that helped you commune with the other side, being used in Ohio. It featured the alphabet, numbers, yes, no, good evening, and good night. The only other necessary object was a little table, the planchette. And the brilliance of the board is that typically anybody could make it. These types of talking boards became very popular, and in 1890, Elijah Bond, Charles Kennard, and William H.A. Maupin had the idea to turn the board into a toy. They filed the first patent, in which they called the board a Ouija board, which looked and acted a lot like the boards that you would see in Ohio. This patent was granted in 1891. There are actually two different reasons why it's called a Ouija, and here's two stories for that, though I believe the latter. The story goes that the makers of the board sat down and asked the board what it should be called, and it replied Ouija. And when they asked what it meant, the board replied, "Good luck." It's believed that this is an ancient Egyptian word, Ouija. I might not even be pronouncing it right, guys. Another explanation for the word Ouija comes from William Fuld, and I believe that this is way more accurate. It sounds more accurate, at least. That when he took over the company, he contracted the name Ouija from the French word and the German word for yes. And that etymology is accepted today widely. The Kennard Novelty Company started producing these boards en masse, and they retailed for only $1.50 at the time, although now that would probably be a lot more. In February of 1891, the first few advertisements for the Ouija board started appearing in papers all over. "A Ouija board, the wonderful talking board," boomed a Philadelphia toy and novelty store. Never-ending amusement for all ages, because really all you needed was the board and a couple of friends. You could even play on your own if you wanted to. Brave. William Fuld, an employee at that company, eventually took over the production of the boards. In 1966, Fuld sold the entire company, which included the Ouija board, to the Parker brothers, who mass-produced this board. And in 1991, the Parker brothers sold it to Hasbro, which now holds all of the patents. So the Ouija board, is it an excellent tool for contacting the other side, or a fascinating glimpse into the non-conscious mind? It's interesting that the Ouija board is patent, and here's why. Truth in advertising is always very hard to come by, especially with regards to products in the 19th century. The Ouija board was mysterious and interesting, but not proven to work by any means. But actually it had been proven to work at the patent office before its patent was allowed to proceed. And today, even some psychologists believe that there is really a link between the known and the unknown. So in early American culture, we see that the Ouija board is a very accepted piece of connecting to the other side. No one's quite afraid of it. It's thrilling, but it's not scary. That is until 1973. What happened in 1973, Kat, you ask? Or didn't? The Exorcist. The Exorcist is a story of a young girl. 12-year-old Regan plays with an Ouija board on her own and becomes possessed by a demon. Scares the living shit out of everybody. People left the theater visibly shaken. It completely changed how everybody saw connecting to the other side, and has influenced culture to this day. During this period, almost overnight, the Ouija board went from a nice way to connect to the other side, a soft way, to becoming a tool for the devil. And this started with its association with being able to open a portal to the other side and unleash hell. Of course, the Ouija board was then denounced by the church as a tool for Satan. Satan was using it as to kind of puppeteer people. And in 2001, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, it was being burned along with copies of Harry Potter and Snow White. I know, I went to a church that burned The Little Mermaid, so sure. Even within the paranormal community, as most know, I'm not a huge fan. The Ouija board has a dodgy reputation. Hasbro and Parker Brothers still have sold hundreds of thousands of these boards, so I'm sure that people are not that afraid. But the real question is, do Ouija boards really work? According to current science, the answer to that is no. They're powered by us. They work on a really simple principle that has carried us for over 160 years when it comes to a Ouija board. It's called the ideomotor effect. In 1852, physician and physiologist William Benjamin Carpenter published a report through the Royal Institution of Great Britain that examined the automatic movements of muscle. Let me show you. This board, for instance, I'm gonna try to hold it still while I explain this, okay? So these automatic movements take place without my volition. I'm not trying to move this, it's just going to move. This is going to move regardless of how still I sit and how still I want to hold it. Also, there's an expectation that when you're using the board, the people around you are not going to move it, which is simply not the case. They may not be wildly trying to trick you into thinking that something's happening. They just might want something to happen so bad that they make it happen, subconsciously. It's the idea of suggestion. But if the Ouija boards can't possibly, according to science, give us questions from the veil, then what can they do? So how they actually work is you, again, put your fingers on the planchette, and it relies on the power of your own body. Now, spiritually speaking, what it's supposed to do is take your energy or your essence and offer it up to the spirits to come through, and then they can manipulate your hands via the board, right? But the planchette will either move to yes, no, goodbye, what have you. The ideometer effect is a subconscious tool. You're going to move the planchette on your own. Skeptical or no, there's a couple of stories that are really, really interesting in regards to the Ouija board, and some of them are really inexplainable. Britain's last witch revealed a military secret. So in 1941, psychic Helen Duncan was approached by a mother hoping for news from her son, who was a soldier in the British Navy. Duncan held a seance and unfortunately revealed that the young man had been lost during the sinking of the HMS Barman. But remarkably, the ship's sinking had not been released to the public yet, to prevent a loss of morale in the really difficult days of World War II. The officers promptly detained her, and Ms. Duncan was tried under Section 4 of the Witchcraft Act of 1735, which forbade spiritual activity. She was the last person to be tried for this before its repeal in 1951. That's really inexplicable that she would know that before the news was released and made public. An Ouija board experiment actually doomed a band's album release. The band The Mars Volta almost canceled an entire album, supposedly because of a cursed spirit board. Guitarist Omar Rodriguez Lopez bought an Ouija board in Jerusalem, and the band used it all together. But then some strange things started happening, including tracks disappearing from their computer, 2 floods in the studio, equipment got ruined, and a really valued engineer just straight up quit. But they channeled these events into the album The Bedlam in Goliath, which was released in 2008. Omar burned the board to avoid any further incidents, but the band broke up in 2013. So, curse. A fake seance got super real for a magic store employee. Bradford J. Angers, a magic shop employee and a psychology student, got a little bit more than he bargained for. A customer paid him $100 to perform a fake seance, complete with sound and visuals. With the aid of a partner, to create an entirely fabricated scene with disembodied voices, speaking predictions that they kind of already knew about in advance. Well, even a mist formed in the middle of the table, which was really impressive. Only once it was over, Angers went to his partner to help him pack up and disconnect the special effects, only to discover that the partner had been locked out the entire time, and whatever happened during the seance was not a part of their plan. Where did the effects come from? One Reddit user was a complete skeptic until something really eerie turned him into a believer. Well, according to the post, the Redditor asked the spirit to tell him a prediction, something that hasn't happened yet, a future event, some news. The spirit replied with D-I, D-I-E, D-I, D-I-E, over and over and over again. And when he asked it to clarify, it said Princess Di, D-I. When he asked how this would happen, it said car accident. And when he asked where this would happen, it said Paris. And when he asked when exactly this was going to happen, it replied Ohio, which he thought was weird, but then he ended up going to Ohio, and that's when the news came out. That Lady Di had died in a car crash in Paris. Sometimes you don't realize how crazy accurate these messages come from the other side until it's already happened. This happened to a Redditor who was dabbling with an Ouija board on New Year's Eve. A spirit, identifying itself as Eugene, said it was afraid. And when they asked more information, the board kept repeating, heart, don't go, church, heart, don't go, church, just over and over again. It wasn't until the next morning that this message made complete sense. The Redditor's great uncle, Eugene, had passed away from a heart attack and revived several times on the hospital table. And once he'd gained full consciousness again, he'd regretted not attending church in 20 years, as the board had indicated. Heart, don't go, church. When a spirit says goodbye, it means goodbye. So apparently, allegedly some teenagers were playing with an Ouija board in Wisconsin. The board was continually going to goodbye. Well, they kept pressuring the spirit to speak more. Finally, I guess it got so tired of these meddling kids that it actually called the telephone. The father picked up, and all he heard was, "Don't F me on the other end." Just leave them alone, kids. Zozo and the Ouija board. These reports have appeared all around the world. I will do a video also on Zozo eventually. His spirit is most known for having intimate knowledge about the person's life. And he kind of manipulates people into causing harm. Sometimes he's funny, sometimes he's a trickster, sometimes he's downright sinister. Pierre Bazozo was his slave name. He was an American slave during the 1800s in Louisiana, which is information that he stated to multiple people. He claims he doesn't wish any harm and he claims he does not want to possess, but I wouldn't trust anything that comes out of Zozo. Do not attempt to contact him. There are many spirits that can be called for through the spirit box. You do not want to attempt this, and I mean it. So what are my thoughts on a Ouija board? Well, personally, I don't think that the physical board does anything. I don't necessarily think that the physical board will open a portal to hell. I don't think that it will actually do something. I believe that contacting the other side is all about intent. If you intend to contact the other side and you believe it in your heart, much like The Secret, you so strongly believe that you're going to connect with the other side, you will. And any object, including this glass of scotch, can be conduits to the other side if you believe in it as such. I think that our intention and our will is so strong that anything could happen in this world. Anything. The history is interesting, the mass marketing is a little bit less interesting, but the Ouija board is a powerful instrument if you believe that it is wrong. I'm very sad to say that the spirituality movement from the 1800s has transformed into everyone being afraid of exorcisms and possessions. Often when communicating with our community, a lot of people ask me questions like, aren't you afraid? And what do I do if a negative spirit comes to me and things like that? It's all about protecting yourself. You have to meditate. You have to picture a white light filling your body and that you are protected. And if you believe in it strong enough, then it will be true. I sound like one of those people that stand up on a stage with a microphone. This is the new age. But I promise you that if you use an Ouija board with the intention that you do want to hear from the spirits and you're truly not going to be afraid, then it will not be a bad thing. I also think that if you put yourself in the spirit's shoes, metaphorically speaking, you want to be careful with what you're doing. You want to take precautions and you want to be respectful of the other side. They're not here for our entertainment. They're here for answers. And they're here to be loved. We're all here to be loved. So I'd love to know your thoughts. Please put them in the comment section down below. Also be sure to like, and if you're not already, please subscribe. I look forward to seeing you again, and I hope that your journey to the other side is always blessed.